The Symbols Flow, Expanded Edition. Part 1. The Root, 2nd century CE, Gaul. The forest was not a silent place. To those who knew how to listen, it was a symphony of life. The rustle of a badger in the undergrowth, the gurgle of the spring over moss-slicked stones, and above all, the voiceless hum of the land itself. A vibration felt more through the soles of the feet than with the ears. Ilara, priestess of the Senonis tribe, knew how to listen. She stood, her bare feet planted in the damp earth, and felt the rhythm of the woods as her own. She was in her early 30s, an age considered the start of a woman's decline in Rome, but here, among the ancient oaks, she was at the height of her power. Her red hair, woven in intricate braids dotted with crow feathers, fell over a tunic of moss-green wool. Her eyes held the forest's own colors, a hazel mix of green and brown that held a wisdom far older than her years. She was a druidess, a keeper of the lore, a healer, a bridge between the sane world and the spirit realm. But her title and her people felt increasingly precarious. Her world was changing with an alarming velocity. The Roman roads, straight and unforgiving, now cut through their sacred groves like scars. A permanent garrison had been established less than a day's walk from their valley, a stone and timber beast that bristled with the sharp geometry of empire. With the soldiers had come merchants, tax collectors, administrators, and their pantheon of gods. Ilara did not hate the Romans, as some of her tribesmen did. Such an emotion was a waste of energy. She was a pragmatist. She saw the resilience in their architecture, the logic in their laws, and the undeniable power in their organization. She even saw echoes of her own deities in theirs. Her Luke of the long hand in their clever Mercury, her great mother Danu in their fertile Venus. This syncretism brought trade goods and a fragile peace, but it was also a slow poison. The children began to speak a pidgin of Gaulish and Latin. The old songs, with their complex genealogies and magical histories, were being forgotten in favor of bawdy legionary tunes. The old ways were being diluted, not by force of arms, but by the steady, relentless tide of culture. That was why tonight was so important. The planet Venus, the five-pointed star of the heavens, shone with a brilliant, unwavering light, a good omen for her work. She had prepared for weeks, a process that was as much a part of the magic as the final casting. She had journeyed for 3 days to the ancient crater where iron stars had fallen from the heavens in the time of her ancestors, to gather energy-rich fragments of meteorite. She had fasted on nothing but spring water and birch sap, cleansing herself until her body trembled with cold and purity. Now, in a sacred clearing where ancient menhirs were aligned to the solstices, she was ready. Her makeshift forge was built into the side of a mossy hillock. The fire, fed with oak logs harvested on the waxing moon and blessed with mistletoe, burned with a fierce, clean light. Watching her, his arms crossed over the leather straps of his armor, was Marcus Vipsanius, a centurion of the Legio Augusta. He was not a typical soldier. His face was a roadmap of campaigns from Germania to Britannia, and his eyes were weary with war. He found more peace in the quiet hum of Ilara's forest than in the harsh discipline and dice games of the garrison. He had come to her months ago, not with a sword, but with a young Optio, a protege, whose leg had been shattered by a training mishap. The garrison physicians, with their saws and probes, had spoken of amputation. Marcus, seeing the boy's despair, had swallowed his Roman pride and sought out the local witch. Ilara had not used incantations of fire and shadow. She had used a poultice of comfrey, which she called knitbone, and a low rhythmic chant that seemed to soothe the boy's spirit as much as his body. The bone had set clean and strong. Since then, a complex, unspoken respect had grown between the centurion and the druidess. "I still do not see why this requires such elaborate ritual," Marcus said, his voice a low, practical rumble. "In Rome, our smiths cast 1,000 objects a day with nothing but fire and sweat." "Because your smiths cast tools, Marcus," Ilara replied, her gaze fixed on the glowing crucible. "They make objects that serve the hand. I am creating a dwelling for a spirit, an object that serves the soul. Every action, every word, every ingredient weaves a part of its strength. It is the difference between building a barracks and growing a tree." She began her chant, a spiraling ancient melody that told the story of the world's creation from the cosmic egg. As she sang, she placed the meteorite shards into the crucible alongside scraps of bronze and tin. The iron from the sky, she believed, held the fire of the stars, while the bronze and tin were of the earth. She was marrying heaven and earth. She called the elements, not as abstract concepts, but as living, breathing entities. Gaia, Earth Mother, grant your stability, your foundation, she intoned, her voice growing stronger. Undine, waters of life, grant your cleansing flow. Sylph, air of the heavens, grant your clarity and vision. Salamander, fire of change, grant your passionate spark. Marcus watched, mesmerized, despite his ingrained skepticism. He saw not a wild shamaness performing superstitious rites, but a master craftsman at her work. The fire seemed to pulse in time with her song, the shadows of the standing stones dancing around them. From the deeper shadows of the trees, another pair of eyes watched with less reverence. Brennus, a young warrior of the tribe, saw this scene as a profound betrayal. His father had died fighting Caesar's legions 2 generations ago, a story he clung to with bitter pride. To him, Ilara's pragmatism was collaboration. Marcus's presence in this most sacred of clearings was a defilement. He saw her magic not as a tool for their people, but as a spectacle to entertain their conqueror. Finally, Ilara called to the 5th, the unifying element. And Aether, spirit that binds all, the space between the stars and the breath in our lungs, fill the empty spaces and make this work whole. The molten metal flared, glowing with a light that seemed to come from within. With one fluid, practiced motion, she poured it into the stone mold she had carved with a deer's antler. As the metal began to cool, she did not plunge it into the spring. Instead, she took a deep breath and pricked her thumb with an obsidian shard, letting a single, dark drop of blood fall onto the still glowing metal. My life into yours, she thought, my line into yours. The blood sizzled and vanished, a final sacrifice to bind the object to her lineage. Only then did she quench it in the sacred spring. The hiss echoed in the sudden silence. She drew out a bronze amulet, steaming in the cool air. A perfect 5-pointed star sat within a circle. It seemed alive, unnaturally warm in her palm, and pulsed with the faint, rhythmic energy she could feel in her bones. Anma, she whispered, the name of vow, the great soul. Marcus stepped closer, his soldier's curiosity overriding his reserve. It is the symbol of Venus, he observed, a sign of good fortune for a soldier. It is a sign of good fortune for all who seek balance, Ilara corrected gently. For us, it is the map of the cosmos. Each point a realm, each line a connection. It is health, it is protection. Not from a sword, Marcus, but from the chaos that unmakes the world. Its power was tested only days later. A sickness swept through the Roman garrison, a dysentery that left the strongest legionaries weak and delirious. The physicians bled them to no avail. Marcus, seeing his command crumbling, came to Ilara again, his face grim. Brennus and his faction were furious. Let them rot, Brennus spat at the village council. It is a gift from the gods, a plague upon our enemies. The gods of my understanding do not gift plagues, Ilara retorted, her voice cutting through the angry murmurs. They gift balance. A sickness like this, left unchecked, will soon find its way to our own hearts. To heal them is to heal ourselves. She walked into the garrison, the Anma amulet a solid weight on her chest. She worked tirelessly, ignoring the fearful stares and muttered curses of the soldiers. She used willow bark for their fevers, moss infusions to quell their stomach cramps. For each man, she knelt, placed the amulet on his brow or stomach, and sang her quiet songs of harmony, visualizing the stars' ordered energy soothing the chaos in their bodies. She saved most of them, including Marcus's second-in-command. Her act cemented her status as a powerful, if unnerving, asset in the eyes of the Roman leadership. But her victory sowed dangerous seeds. Brennus saw her as a traitor, wasting their ancestral power on the enemy. And the greatest threat of all arrived not with a legion, but on the sandaled feet of a gaunt traveler carrying a wooden cross. His name was Paulinus, a missionary of the Nazarene cult. He spoke with a terrifying certainty, his voice ringing with passion and condemnation. He spoke of one God, one truth, one path to salvation, and eternal damnation for all others. His dualistic worldview, a stark battle between absolute good and absolute evil, was utterly alien to Ilara's cyclical, interconnected understanding of the world. Paulina saw Ilara cleansing the spring after the sickness, the amulet gleaming on her chest. He did not see a priestess maintaining balance. He saw a pagan consorting with demons. "Cast aside that idolatrous sigil of the pentacle," he cried, his voice startling the birds from the trees. "It is a sign of the 5 senses that chain man to the sinful earth, a mockery of the 5 holy wounds of the Christ. Renounce your devilish arts and accept the one true light." Paulinus, some of the villagers, weary of the complex old ways and frightened by the power of Rome, were drawn to the simple, stark certainty Paulinus. His family history, as far as he knew, was an unremarkable line of country squires who had faded into obscurity. But the death of a forgotten great-aunt had left him a tall, narrow townhouse in the Moraes district, a house filled with the dusty, chaotic inheritance of his lineage. It was on a sweltering August afternoon, while sorting through a battered sea chest filled with crumbling letters and moth-eaten clothes, that he found it. A false bottom, cleverly concealed. A scrap of linen that disintegrated into dust at his touch. And a heavy, bronze object that felt cool and solid in his palm. Even before he wiped away the centuries of grime with his handkerchief, he knew what it was: the pentagram. To his colleagues in the order, it was an astonishing find. They gathered around it in their temple, a lavishly decorated room hidden behind a quiet antiquarian bookshop near Notre Dame. The air was thick with the scent of sandalwood incense and old paper. "This is no common peasant's charm," declared Stanislas de Guaita, one of the order's founders, a marquis and a renowned occultist. He peered at it through a magnifying glass. The precision of its lines, though worn by time, speaks of a true understanding of sacred geometry. This is the star of the Magi, the symbol of the perfected microcosm, of the human will triumphant over the chaotic elements. But it was also a mystery. Its provenance was unknown. Julian felt a deep personal connection to it, a strange sense of déjà vu, a feeling that it was not just an artifact, it was an inheritance of the soul. He began an obsessive quest for knowledge, a quest that took him from his armchair studies into a full-blown investigation. He spent days in the cavernous reading room of the Bibliothèque Nationale, comparing the amulet's design to the diagrams and the grimoires of Agrippa, Trithemius, and John Dee. He learned of its medieval vilification when it was perversely called the Goblin's Cross or the Witch's Foot. He devoured the works of Eliphas Levi, the great reviver of magic, who had restored the pentagram to a place of honor, carefully explaining the profound difference between the upright star, the symbol of man's ascent, and the inverted, the sign of the goat, of surrender to base instincts. His amulet, he realized with a thrill, was a pure affirmation of spirit over matter. To aid in his research, he enlisted the help of a fellow member of the order, a sharp-witted woman named Elodie, who was a gifted clairvoyant and a scholar of ancient languages. She was practical and grounded, a perfect foil to his poetic sensibilities. "It has a memory, Julian," she said one evening, holding the amulet suspended over a map. It swayed gently, seemingly of its own accord. "A long and painful one. I see fire, and I see a forest so green it hurts the eyes." Julian began to incorporate the amulet into his rituals, not as a tool for folk magic, but as a key for unlocking his own consciousness. He performed the lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram, using a steel dagger to trace the symbol in the air at the 4 quarters of his magic circle, feeling its energy cleanse and seal the space. The amulet itself lay on his altar, on a cloth of black silk, a silent focal point for his will. But the occult world of Paris was not without its own perils. There were other groups, seekers of power rather than enlightenment. The most dangerous of these was led by the self-styled Comte de Valerius, a charismatic and wealthy Russian émigré who preached a form of esoteric Luciferianism. He taught that true power came not from balancing the darkness, but from mastering and enslaving it. Valerius heard of Julian's discovery through the city's occult grapevine. He visited Julian at his townhouse, ostensibly to admire the artifact. He was handsome, dressed in the height of fashion, but his dark eyes held a chilling emptiness. "A beautiful piece," Valerius purred, his fingers hovering over the amulet, but not touching it. "But you are using it like a child's toy, de Clermont. Banishings, purifications, these are the rituals of those who fear the darkness. Its true power, its active potential, is only unlocked when one dares to invert its polarity, to call upon the magnificent intelligences that wait below." Julian felt a cold revulsion. That is the path to madness. It is servitude to instinct, not mastery of the self. Valerius smiled, a thin, predatory expression. Mastery is using all the tools at your disposal. Their rivalry escalated from philosophical debate to magical warfare. Valerius began to exert his influence over Julian with psychic attacks, horrific nightmares that left him screaming, intrusive blasphemous thoughts that plagued his meditations, a constant paranoid feeling of being watched. Julian, for the first time, had to use his knowledge not for self-improvement, but for self-preservation. With Elodie's help, he prepared a great ritual of protection. They worked for days, calculating astrological timings, preparing incenses, and chalking a complex series of nested circles on the floor of his library. He placed the amulet over his heart, its cool weight a comfort. As he stood in the circle, chanting the divine names of protection, he closed his eyes. This time, the vision was not a fleeting image. It was an immersive, overwhelming experience. He felt the cool of a primeval forest and smelled damp earth and wood smoke. He saw Elara, her name echoing in his mind like a bell, forging the amulet in a sacred fire. He felt her intention, her love, her fear for the future. The scene then dissolved into fire and pain. He was standing in a medieval town square, the air thick with the stench of burning flesh. He saw Agnes, tied to a stake, her eyes meeting his across the centuries. He didn't just see her, he felt her terror, her defiance, and the fierce protective love for her daughter that burned hotter than the flames. He heard her last thought, not as words, but a pure transmission of will. Keep it safe. Keep the line alive. He gasped, staggering back, the psychic connection breaking. The room was icy cold. Elodie rushed to his side. "Julian, what did you see?" "Our history," he breathed, "the true one." Valerius's psychic assault shattered against the amulet's energy, which was now fortified not just by ritual, but by the living memory of Elara's creation and Agnes's sacrifice. It was a shield forged of wisdom and love, and Valerius's magic, born of ego and hunger, could not penetrate it. Julian was a changed man after that night. His pursuit was no longer merely intellectual or aesthetic. It was personal. It was a sacred duty. He was a link in a long hidden chain. Having no children of his own, he feared he might be the last. He dedicated the next year of his life to documenting everything. In a fine leather-bound journal, he recorded the rituals, the complete history of the pentagram as he had researched it, and a detailed, emotional account of the ancestral memory the amulet held. He commissioned a master craftsman to build a rosewood box with a secret compartment. Inside, he placed the journal and the amulet. His final ritual was one of concealment, weaving a spell around the box to keep it hidden from those, like Valerius, who would misuse it, and to reveal it only to one of his bloodline who was ready to understand. He had restored the symbol's Gnostic meaning, but he had also layered it with a new one, a meaning of hidden history, of blood memory, and of the eternal struggle to protect wisdom from ignorance and hatred. The amulet was no longer just a symbol, it was a chronicle, waiting for its next reader. Part 4. The Rebirth, year 2025, California. Luna de Clement ran a boutique nursery and antiquarian bookstore on a sun-drenched corner in Oakland, California. The shop, called The Root and the Leaf, smelled of damp earth, old paper, and the faint spicy trace of the Nag Champa incense she burned behind the counter. She was a living blend of her heritages, the quiet pragmatism of a small business owner, the fierce intellect of a bibliophile, and a deep, abiding sensitivity to the unseen world that she was only just beginning to understand. Her most tangible heritage sat in a polished rosewood box on a bookshelf in her loft apartment above the shop. The box, with its heavy bronze amulet and Julian's faded, elegant journal, had come to her through a winding, unlikely path of childless inheritors and forgotten branches of the family tree, eventually landing with the line that had immigrated to America in the early 20th century. For most of her youth, the amulet was just a curiosity, a quirky family story about an eccentric Parisian poet who dabbled in spiritualism. But as Luna grew older, she found herself drawing to it. She would hold it in her hand, its worn surface smooth against her skin, and feel an undefinable sense of longing, a homesickness for a place she'd never been. It was Julian's journal that unlocked the door. His French was florid and archaic, but after a year of patient work with dictionaries and online translation tools, she pieced it together. She read of the elements, of the microcosm, of rituals performed by candlelight. And with a growing sense of awe and dread, she read of his visions, of a Celtic priestess named Ilara and a martyred healer named Agnes. This began a quest. Unlike Julian, who had to search in dusty, exclusive libraries, Luna had the vast, chaotic library of the internet at her fingertips. She searched Pentagram, Eliphas Levi, ceremonial magic. These searches led her down a rabbit hole of discovery, and at the bottom, she found a world. A vast, vibrant community existing just beneath the surface of her modern life.